Hi and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen, and this is a show where we talk about all manner of things related to, well, media, but also the impressions that media creates, the people who are active in media, the people who may be active against media or forms of media, and this includes pretty much anybody. So we're a very open-minded lot here, and we include, of course, academics, researchers, consultants, and today I'm delighted to say we have a trade unionist or a former trade unionist. Maybe once you're a trade unionist, you're always a trade unionist, but I'm delighted to welcome Dennis Daly. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Marcus.
To Boston Media Theory. We're going to have a conversation about the union movement as you experienced it, and hear some stories from you, particularly the union movement in the northeast of the United States, although of course there was always a national consideration. And then after we've talked about that for a little while, we'll hear about some of your poetry, and that's how I met you, through
right.
poetry. So I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to talk about the labour movement. The conflicts that emerged between capitalists and workers, if you like, seemed like a long time ago. Seemed like something that was more intense years ago. And now, of course, union membership in the US is just 14.4 million, or about 10% of the workforce. So it's what's happened to the union movement, and what's your sort of sense of it, just to start us off?
Well, I think what I'm familiar with is the factory labor movement, and the factories have gotten smaller and smaller in years past. When I worked for GE, the General Electric company, we had a series of plants. Our local was 9,000 union members, and there were 16,000 employees that worked in the Lynn GE site, Lynn, Everett, Wilmington, but most of them in Lynn, Massachusetts. And so when someone was campaigning for to be in the union leadership, as I did, you would campaign at all these different sites.
All right. And so what union were you active in, and what years marked that activity?
I was in the International Union of Electrical Workers, and the years I was active was probably 1985 to 1989, and I was very much involved during some interesting and some bad times, because there were huge layoffs at the end of it in 1989. And but I was very much involved before I was elected. I was active in the shop, and I think most of my successes actually came in the shop. Once I was elected, I was part of a bureaucracy, and there were a lot of things that you couldn't do. And like, for instance, you couldn't pull a wildcat strike because you were striking against yourself, essentially, because you had agreed to a certain procedure that may possibly go to arbitration, may possibly go to a strike, but time would have to go by. And I broke that agreement while I was a union leader, and I did pull a major wildcat strike, and which happened towards the end of my tenure, and increased the animosity between myself and Jack Welch, who was the head of the General Electric company.
Now, well, Jack Welch. Now, General Electric, we can talk about Jack Welch, who is like this bogey character, right? For workers, for the working class perhaps, and certainly a representative of a very hardcore kind of corporate approach to working people. As I understand it, even when I was younger in Australia, his reputation reached there, as this was the person who would take any measure at all to mobilise the forces of management in order to raise stock prices and all that sort of stuff. So sort of cynical stuff, but Jack Welch was really the pinnacle of, could we say, the sort of end of General Electric in the Northeast?
From my point of view, he was a disaster for the General Electric Company.
Oh, really?
He turned GE into a bank, GE Capital, a bank which ultimately failed. And 40% of GE at that time was invested in GE Capital. And personally, I used to write articles about him. I had a friend who was a cartoonist, and we used to put those cartoons in about Jack Welch. It used to drive him crazy, and he used to send personal threatening messages to me. And when I was involved in negotiations at our Wilmington plant, and a gentleman was fired, and I was trying to get him. He was fired unjustly, and I was trying to get his job back. And I made an agreement with the company representative at that plant to get his job back, and he agreed, and that was the end of that, I thought. When I went a few weeks later, I noticed he wasn't back at work. So I checked with the GE representative, and he says, Dennis, he says, he's not coming back. And I said, you gave me your word. He has to come back, because the way you negotiated, your word was everything on both sides. And he said, this comes from Jack Welch. He says, and I have to feed my family too. Oh. And you'll never get this place out. And I said, we'll see. And so I got the executive board member, and this is when I was in the leadership. And you technically couldn't do this. It was against the law. And I went in to the Wilmington plant, went through the whole plant. They made piano assemblies for the stealth fighters. And I went from room to room to room, about under 2,000 people there, and told them we had to go out on strike. And so the day came, and the executive board member said, okay. He says, I'm with you. Let's see what happens. And so we went in, and we pulled the whole plant. And so I'm home the day afterwards, and I get a call from GE saying, get your family out of there. We've contacted the federal marshals, and they're coming in to arrest you. And I said, great. So I got my family out, but they never did show up. And I was called 2 or 3 days later, and by GE, and they said, Jack Welch is furious, and he wants those people back. What will it take to get them back? And so I said, you rehire this guy, and you put him back to work. And they said, okay, we agree. And so they said, so they'll be back tomorrow. I said, no, we have to vote. And once we vote, they'll be back. And so we did that. And he did go back to work. But I had the everlasting animosity of Jack Welch, and who got involved in the union election, actually, and he promised to get even. Well, at least he promised me to my face. I'll give him that.
Oh, okay, all right. You can wear that as a badge of honor.
That's right. So he did get even, but.
Right. One of the things you mentioned, which is something of a surprise to me, although perhaps it shouldn't be, is the military connection, the Air Force, or the engines that were being made for the airplanes and for other things. And of course the surprise is the connection between the union movement and what we now refer to as MIC, or the military industrial complex, and the very close association. And we tend not to think of that as the foundation of General Electric, but would it be fair to say that that became the biggest part of General Electric, its service, as it were, of military supplies?
Oh, absolutely. And the two largest areas where I worked were medium steam turbine and aircraft. And in the aircraft, they built the T-700 helicopter engines, the F-404, which were for fighter jets. We built the stealth engines. There were a number of black jobs there. And so because of that, and because of the political activism there, we were very often we were put under surveillance. There were CIA agents in there. There were the FBI was in there. You never knew who was watching you, whether it was spies that GE had hired and sent in there, or whether they were feds. And so, but you just worked your way around that.
Well, it does change the character of what a union seems to do, doesn't it? I mean, you're kind of aware of the fact that you're actually in the service of the US government and its military build-ups.
That's true, we were, and that really gave us, and that gave the union a lot of extra power, I thought. Because they had to deal with us, and we were always involved with our senators and our congressional people, and they would call us. They called me from the floor of the Senate, Ted Kennedy, to tell us about various contracts that were coming our way in the billions of dollars.
So you mentioned Ted Kennedy there. Clearly, most people, I think, who followed his career knew that he was extremely sympathetic to the labour movement. Was that your experience?
That was my experience. I thought very highly of Ted Kennedy, and I know he had personal problems or whatever, but as far as dealing with him, he always kept his word, and he worked for us. Other U.S. congressmen had a hand in getting us getting GE contracts, which were done elsewhere, Brazil, Europe, other places. But one thing Ted Kennedy did is the contracts that he got were sent directly to GE Lynn, and so at least our employees worked on those things. Yeah. And like I said, a lot of them were military, and
yeah. What's your feeling now, these many years later, about the dwindling number of people in the new union movement? Is it a sort of sense of disappointment to you, or is it just history unwinding, or what? How would you see it?
That's actually a good phrase, history unwinding. I think the union movement did an awful lot. Our union was very, very successful in the day-to-day business of being a union, and we actually, I think, helped the General Electric Company as far as productivity and against corruption, because there was corruption in a lot of places, and we would find out about it, and we would use that, or we would force them to correct that, and which happened over and over again. Right. And so I think the union movement was very, very helpful to the company as well as to our own employees. And I think one of the reasons that the unionism is not, it doesn't have the numbers it once did, was because it accomplished a lot of what it wanted to accomplish, and from the Wobblies, the workers of the world, and everything. A number of whom I met, by the way, and they were campaigning for one of my opponents actually, and but terrific people, and you know, back then you were radical if you believed in Social Security, and you know,
yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't
it? Yeah. And so they accomplished a lot, and like anything else, it'll come back in some form. It will come back, and it still is a bastion in the public sector.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yeah, although it's undergoing some challenges now, which we'll talk about in a minute. One of the points, of course, that's very significant in, I suppose, the development of the American style, unique American style of democracy, and then anti-democratic activities, has been the role of socialists and the Communist Party connected to the union movement, and those
Right.
kinds of connections over many years have been objects of suppression and anxiety and red baiting and all that sort of thing, and the unions have had to navigate their way through those challenges, particularly where there was leadership from within the Communist Party, right?
Well, that's true. Our union, the IUE, evolved from the UE, and if evolving is a good term, but the UE was a great union, and it was affiliated with the Communist Party, but those were the McCarthy years, and the AFL came into power and became the AFL-CIO, and they wanted a different brand of unionism, and so that brand of unionism came into being. But still, the old techniques and a lot of the old beliefs just went from the old type of union to the new type of unions.
Right. Well, it didn't, yes, because it wasn't as if the working class changed. The working class still had similar conditions to deal with, didn't they?
They did. One of the first jobs that I had when I was hired into GE, I came out of college, which so people, of course, made fun of me and whatever, and my job was a sweeper. And I probably stayed in that job a little too long, to be honest, but one of my first jobs was sweeping up asbestos dust.
Oh.
And
you're still here.
And I was told to sweep it up and then bring it out back, and there was a like those ship containers.
Oh yeah.
And
Dumpsters.
And it was essentially a dumpster, and open the side door and throw it in. I opened the side door. The whole thing was filled with asbestos and would just envelop you. And one aside, after I was elected, I was in my office at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock one night. I get a call from the gear plant, which used to be the biggest building in the state. And they said, there's been an explosion down here. You better the hell get down there. So I did. I went down there, and I walk into the place. It was snowing. And of course, and I pulled the stewards out, and I says, what's happening here? And they said, one of the ovens exploded. This is all asbestos. We're breathing it. And I says, why are you still here? Because the managers won't let us go because they haven't got permission yet. I said, are you nuts? I says, get everyone, we're having a parade. And got all the employees, and we had a parade out the door, up the hill, into the management offices, and opened the door. I says, follow me. And we went up the stairs over the oriental carpets into their living rooms with the mahogany furniture. I says, make yourself comfortable. And these were hundreds of guys. And the managers that were there said, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I says, we ain't leaving until they have permission with pay to go home. And they're breathing asbestos dust down in the gear plant. Well, it didn't take them long to get permission after that. It was within 10 minutes, actually.
Right. Direct action, I think they call that. One of the things, just before we finish this and then move on to talk a little bit about your poetry, was, of course, the transformation of not only of US society with fewer people in the union movement, but also the fact that in the last election, there was a 15-point swing towards Trump from people earning less than $50,000 a year, people who were described as working class. 50,000 maybe in some places reasonable, but certainly a significant swing towards Trump. And this has given rise to a whole series of discussions about whether or not the Democratic Party, which was cynically relying on workers, can no longer do that, that Trump has changed the calculations. You pay close attention to this. What would you say about this transformation or this change that's underway in the relationship between, let's say, working people, trade unionists, and political leadership or the politics in the US?
I think a lot of what we used to call blue-collar workers, of course we don't have nearly as many as we did before, including new immigrants. Like when I worked at GE, we had a lot of Haitian immigrants, very fine people, very hard workers, and but they tended to be more conservative because they were concerned about their livelihoods, and they had families and so on and so forth, and so that was their main concern. And when you lost touch with their livelihoods, you lost them, and so a lot of them have gravitated, I think, out of the Democratic Party because they think the Democratic Party is led by elitists who don't have a sense what it is to work on jobs like that. In my day, it used to be leather factories, fiberglass factories, all of which I've worked in actually, and in big factories like GE, and so I think the Democratic Party has to get back those people because they've lost them, and the middle class has gravitated. The middle class is a higher class now, but they as they got wealthier, they gravitated out, and now they look back and they don't like what they see, and because the focus is not on their livelihoods, and I think that's a big deal.
Right, a very big deal. Now you had a clipping you were going to show us of an event, a major event. Do you have?
I know what it was. It was a defense scandal at GE.
Right.
And
1988, is that right?
Huh?
1988.
1988. This was the. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it. I don't know whether the viewers can see it, but defence scandal cost GE 500 jobs and millions. And it is 1988.
Yes. GE called me in and said, there's terrific corruption going on here regarding the military aircraft, and we know about it, but we can't say anything because we depend on the government for our contracts. And and they said, see that box on the conference table? That has all the information in it. We can't possibly show you that. And there's a Xerox machine in the hall that you might want to use, and we're going to go somewhere for 2 hours. And they walked out. So I made copies of everything, and sure enough, it showed our jobs were being dual sourced, sent over to Scotland, and other places, and there was, and when that happened, there was a lot of money exchanging hands. So I took the information and I went to the Boston Herald. For 3 days, they ran it as a headline story, and then the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and every other paper in the world got it. And so I had to answer their questions and whatever, because GE didn't want to be involved. And as a result, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a guy named Paisley, a war hero actually, I found out afterwards, he was arrested and he went to prison. And the Secretary of the Navy, a guy named Lehman, resigned. And so the whole thing blew up. And it was good that it blew up. It was in our interest. It was in both the company's interest and the union's interest. So that's one of the few times you were able to work together to make something happen.
Right, and it certainly shows that there's a kind of clear moral sense to what you did. Now, before we run out of time, I want to also give you the opportunity to read some of your poetry. You've had several books of poetry published. This is one called The Custom House.
Yep.
And let's hear some of your poetry that, in this case, reflects some of your work and experiences in the labour movement, Dennis. So what are you going to read to us?
Okay, I'm going to read first The Electrician.
The Electrician, wonderful.
He knew things. Listened to what? I'm sorry. He knew things. Listened to wires buzz above us, renewed connections or broke them off. Every liquid lunch he fueled up, inflamed with fervor, funneling information to me, my trusted friend. His soul sparked at screwdriver contact, creating a myth costumed in pads, helmeted in hard plastic, to face down enmity of undetonated bile set to go off on the weight of my step. He believed in wonder, showed me the bug phones and gadget traps, his fear cords still frayed. He generated whatever I became.
So how did your interest in poetry emerge, Dennis? Was this something that came from childhood, from college, or?
It came from high school,
Right.
high school through Boston College, and it took shape at Northeastern. Actually, I went to grad school at Northeastern, and it's grown ever since.
So good Boston universities and colleges in your history.
Yeah.
So great. So and clearly it's something that you have continued to do. How many books of poetry have you?
So far,
published?
11.
11. That's an enormous number. So read us. We've got 3 minutes. So read us something else if you wouldn't
Okay,
mind.
I'll read you something else. This isn't a nice poem, but one of my other heads of the union was, I found out, was under company pay. He was getting a lot of money from the company, and he betrayed us. He was an ally of mine, and so he stayed in his position, but we worked around him. This is his poem. Rat friend, doubled your money, didn't you? Yes, you admitted it to me. I'm a whore, you said. That doesn't excuse what you did, your betrayals. You were clever, plotted with us, a tempered representative of your fellow workers, a peace worker on paper, reporting every decision of ours to your handlers. My home under surveillance for 6 months, and you, my good friend, my erstwhile ally. I stood on pallets next to you campaigning, laughed at your wit, at your wry, disturbing ironies. Okay.
So that's a fair bit of emotion there, Dennis. And let's just finish on this point. Your own sort of sense of an emotional connection, is it a kind of love that one has, spending a lifetime connected to the union and to organised labour?
The years I spent I was stupid when I was elected. I was more stupid even before I was elected. I didn't know how things worked. Everything I learned, thanks to that electrician I mentioned, I learned there, and it was very intense, and it was a rough time, and it was the most wonderful time of my life.
Great. Well, thank you, Dennis, and it's been great to hear the stories that you've had to tell us, and also to gain a better understanding of not only the history of the union movement, at least in this region as it relates to GE, but also then your own interpretations of it through your poetry. So thanks for being a guest.
Thank you.
And that's it from us and from me, from Marcus Breen and Boston Media Theory from this afternoon or this evening. And until next time, keep on mediating. Thank you.